All right, good morning, everyone. This is Revenue and Pricing Analytics. Let's get started. I'm James Lenahan, Senior Manager of Financial Planning and Analysis at Tableau. And I'll tell you, I think many of you came from the keynote this morning with Susan Cain, and as a fellow introvert, given a room this large, I kind of nearly walked out thinking about one introvert talking to this many of you all, but I'm very excited to be with you here today. Raise your hand if this is your first TC or you're a beginner at Tableau. Awesome. I made this presentation for you. Really great to have you here. We were all beginners once, and this is my first time presenting at a TC, so I'm a beginner in that sense along right side you. And raise your hand if you've been with Tableau for a while, using Tableau, or you've been multiple TCs. All right, great to have you here as well. I've built dashboards over a number of years at Tableau, and I've hoped to share some tips and tricks I've learned along the way myself. So let's dive in a little bit about myself first. I've been at Tableau for about 6 years in finance. That's right, I'm not in sales, I'm not an engineer, I'm a business user like many of you. I used to run our revenue accounting team, our accounts receivable, and our billing functions. And most recently, I'm running our sales and revenue forecasting and analysis in our FP&A team, among other management projects. Went to the University of Illinois. We have anybody from Chicago here today? Awesome, yep. Great to have you all. And I got my MBA at the University of Washington, Foster School of Business in Seattle. And last but not least, I've got an amazing wife, and I have 2 kids under 2. So I got my son there who's almost 2, and our daughter who's 2 months old. So if I look a little tired, it's not just day to night out. Although many of you, if you have young kids yourself, you know that actually being out here in Vegas is a bit of a vacation and relaxation. So some great sleep here. But at any rate, let's jump into the agenda. I'll talk a little bit about why pricing matters, and not just in general, but why today, why now. And I'll share some bit of information about pricing and revenue at Tableau. And before you ask, this session's not about negotiating pricing with Tableau, so you can stop, come after me for discounts. And we'll be analyzing historical sales data. I constructed this session to be a little bit like a wine tasting, right? I'll be your data sommelier. I've got not 1, not 2, but 3 different Tableau dashboards that I built and used, and we'll be sampling a little bit about each of those along the way. As you saw with all your other sessions this week, there's a survey at the end. Again, this is my first time presenting. I would love to have all of your feedback so I can improve. And last but not least, all the data in this presentation is fictional. I spent a lot of time making fake data for my dashboards. Okay, let's jump into why pricing matters today. Well, you're all here. There's hundreds of you, so clearly you're here on a Friday morning right after data night out, and you're excited about pricing, so you've probably got your own answer to this question. All right. But I've got a few thoughts for myself here to share with you. 1, business models are changing, and it's happening in all industries rapidly. We've seen this in our own personal lives, right? Just look at your own spending to see how things you used to buy and how you used to buy them have changed. And it's not just technology industries like Tableau. Whether you're a kid at heart or you have kids at home, you might have signed up for a new major streaming service that launched earlier this week. That's right, traditional media is changing as well. Speaking of subscriptions, pricing has a huge impact on your customer lifetime value, right? That initial deal you have with your customers when you're selling a subscription has a material impact on how much you're going to make with them over their lifetime with you. It's very difficult to adjust pricing once you've set expectations in that relationship with these customers. It's a huge dynamic change from a traditional business model, from a usage or transaction-based to subscription. And beyond customer lifetime value and beyond subscriptions, in general, pricing has a major impact on your business. Consider this really simple fact. A 1% change in your pricing has a greater impact to your bottom line than a 1% increase or change in your sales volume. Well, why is that? It's very simple, really. You think about increase what you're selling, whether you're selling physical goods or a service, there's still a cost to serve or sell, your manufacturing costs, your service costs. There's a cost you incur by selling more. But if you can improve your pricing on a quantity that you're already selling, most of that pricing improvement will fall straight to your bottom line. And you might be skeptical if you're in finance like myself, like how can you actually change your pricing without people buying less? We'll touch on that in a little bit. And last but not least, you might be most skeptical of this, Your offerings are not a commodity. I'm here to tell you today that pricing captures the value of everything your organization does. That's why I think it's really exciting, right? Everything you're doing, all the research, all the marketing, all those customer relationships, you're ultimately pricing your product or service or experience to capture the value that you're offering your customers. You still don't believe me? I think you might say commodity, like there's companies that trade commodities, there's so many things I can think of that I don't care about, right? Well, I think my own personal life. When you think you've got a commodity, you might be like me when I go to the grocery store. See, my first job in high school was at a grocery store, so I'm actually still really fond of doing a lot of the family grocery shopping. And my wife's Polish. Do we have anybody else that's Polish in the room? Nope, just a few people. Okay, well, you may not know this, so a little fact, but for some reason, Polish cuisine, we love sour cream. I don't know why, but sour cream is in every dish. They put sour cream in salads, soups, on their pierogi or dumplings, more places than you can ever imagine. I'm half Polish, so I like my sour cream on the side, but we buy a lot of sour cream. And so I'm going to the store, and we buy, again, an excessive amount of sour cream. And I'm in finance, so to me, it's sour cream. I buy the cheapest one. But when I come home, my wife right away says, this is not the right sour cream. And we've debated this at length. To me, again, it's just sour cream, so I bought the cheaper one. And she tells me, she can taste the difference. And I have to go back to the store. Have you ever had to go back to a store, not because you forgot something, right, but because someone in your family or something, you didn't get the right thing? You kind of have your tail between your legs, and you avoid that cashier. As an introvert, I want to avoid the cashier I just saw, so I don't have to explain the situation. It's embarrassing. It's not just about that brand power. We debated we'd do like a blind taste test. I'll buy 6 sour creams, and you'll never figure this out, right? It's not just about that brand or perceived taste. There's innovation in sour cream, believe it or not. You're going to learn a lot today about it. The company, the brand that my wife likes, Daisy Sour Cream, if you work in grocery or retail, Daisy's a leading brand of sour cream. And you also may know that dairy in general as a category in the United States is on the decline. But in 2015, Daisy came out with a different packaging for sour cream. They used to sell it in these tubs, and now they have these squeezable pouches where you can squeeze it on, and if you're not into putting it on everything like a Polish person, you have like a taco night, and you'll put this on your tacos, right? And it's much easier to squeeze out of this pouch versus the tub. When a declining category, just changing the packaging from a tub to a squeezable pouch, they actually were able to both increase their prices and raise their sales volume at the same time. It was incredible. So how do they do that, right? Well, they added value to consumers by giving them something that was useful, being able to squeeze this as a topping as opposed to scooping out of a tub. So those pouches are actually fewer ounces per package, so that's a price increase right there. And they also raised the prices. They actually had a 25% increase in their prices per ounce by moving to the squeezable package. And yet they actually grew their market share from 2015 to 2017. They grew, even though they were a category leader, they grew their market share by 11%. So not only were they, you might think, oh, they'll just cannibalize the tub sales and they get the squeezable pouches instead. They actually grew their portion of the category because they unlocked value for their customers and they captured that through pricing. So if you think you've got a commodity, if you're that company that feels like, how could I possibly differentiate? I have to go just drop my prices down to meet my competitors. You're really leaving value on the table. Now that you're as excited about sour cream as I am, let's talk about Tableau. So we've seen a number of pricing and revenue changes at Tableau. And again, I've been there for 6 years, since 2013, so I've seen a number of this myself. But if you're not familiar, for the longest time in Tableau, we were predominantly a perpetual licensing company. We sold our desktop and our server product on a perpetual license basis. If you're not familiar with licensing, it's like selling the DVD, right? And we launched our Tableau Online product, our SaaS business, in 2013. But when you think about Tableau starting in 2003, for the longest time, we were selling DVDs, if you will. We made a massive change in 2017, as many of you might know, and we moved to more of a subscription model. So instead of having that DVD, we have the streaming service. And at the same time, when you think about it, much like a company changing its packaging or experience, we think about how do we think about our pricing and our relationship with our customers when we make these changes. Then we changed how we offer our products, not on a perpetual to subscription basis, but how to bundle our products in a way that's logical for our customers. So we moved to new role-based offerings where we think about what are the types of people that actually use our products at our customer base. And we launched new products like Tableau Prep that year to affect some of the change as well. To make it a little more confusing or stressful internally in finance, there was a major new accounting standard change that many of you in accounting or finance would be familiar with that completely changed the revenue recognition rules. So this was a lot of fun for myself over time at Tableau. So beyond that history, what does it actually look like to have a pricing lifecycle at Tableau? Well, it starts with strategy, which it should start for anyone. What is your company trying to achieve? How do you differentiate yourself in the marketplace? What choices do you make? And as you set that strategy and think about it, you realize there might be gaps in your service offerings to your customers. So we found data preparation was a challenge for customers, an unmet need, and that's how we came up with Tableau Prep. You can see how we've had things we want to improve on for server admins and how we have things like data catalog and data management coming out. When we have a new innovation like that, we have a centralized pricing team that does a lot of initial pricing research. Now, this is a really interesting area and topic. It's often whether you might have a strategy team or it might be in your marketing organization, but they're doing that initial analysis of what value have we created out of our R&D and what value does that give to customers and how can we capture that? So doing pricing studies, understanding your customers' willingness to pay and the like. And ultimately, that kind of comes out with a list price. Right? And it'd be nice to think that everything just ends with a list price and there's one simple price that we could price everything at. But anyone who's familiar with pricing or finance knows that's just not the case. In B2B enterprise software transactions, there's negotiations. And for a variety of reasons, you might have different currencies or regions or channels. There's no one true list price at anything anymore. Internally, we have in our operations division a group called Deal Desk. You might have a deal desk yourself. You might also call it as a pricing desk, or it might be a group within your sales operations team. They help our salespeople handle the most complicated contracts. So our salespeople can focus on customer relationships, and they focus on helping understanding pricing decisions. And of course, for our largest transactions, our executives will get involved as well. Ultimately, that obviously culminates in actual sales. And we've sold quite a lot as I've been at Tableau. In my area of focus, while there's a lot of exciting things in pricing research, my focus today will be around the actual sales transactions. So there's a whole body of, we can get into several other sessions about pricing research itself, but we'll talk about how to analyze your sales data. Speaking of analyzing historical sales data, why would you analyze it at all? Well, it's rhetorical, it may be very obvious to you, but I'll share just one thought process of why you might want to analyze your sales data and why there's a challenge today without using your data. I would submit to you that there's a lack of visibility across sales teams. If you don't work in sales, it might be difficult to empathize, but think about how challenging it could be to be a salesperson in a negotiation. I like to say that, you imagine yourself as a sales rep in Seattle trying to work with a technology customer. There's a lot of similarities in that relationship as somebody who's in sales that's down in the Bay Area selling to technology customers. But when they're moving really fast, it's difficult for those teams to coordinate and think about what each of them are doing. And anything that involves taking a lot of time, remember that I like to say time kills everything, especially deals. And there's this quarterly pressure to meet targets, right? Any type of industry you're in, there's often quotas. We were once a public company ourselves and had numbers and commitments to shareholders to meet. What does that culminate into? Well, when you're not thinking about what others are doing and you lack data and you have pressure, it ends up with gut feel pricing. What feels right in the situation? The sales rep, you might be thinking more about the data that you have, your own relationships with customers, previous transactions with just one company, or what they like to do. How many of you have felt like there's a lot of gut feel pricing in your business? There's a few, yeah. Or how about hearing the phrase like a one-time pricing exception? We'll never price it this way again, right? There's a lot of laughs there because we know if you let everything operate as gut feel and one-time pricing exceptions, the exceptions become the norm. All of that results in unnecessary variability in your pricing. And that's where the lost value is occurring in your sales. How are we going to solve this predicament with data? Let's get into that. And first, though, often people ask, well, how do we even get to the data before we analyze it? And again, I'm a business user, so I'm not highly technical, but I'll just share with you a little bit about our sales data and how that's structured before we get it into Tableau for analysis. So we use Salesforce.com. We've used that for a long time as our CRM. And our old way of doing this was actually pulling some of that data out, putting it on-prem into a SQL server that we would then connect to in Tableau Desktop. And more recently, we've moved to using Salesforce, but pulling that into Snowflake, so having our data in the cloud to report on. This is my highly technical drawing of how this all works. So let's actually dive into analyzing that data now that we would have it in Tableau. And for reference, if you're not familiar with Salesforce and how the data is structured, imagine that what I'm looking at in each of these dashboards, one row in the table represents a line item on a sales order. So if you're familiar with Salesforce, you have opportunities, that's a deal that you'll have with a given customer, a transaction. And then you'll have line items like different products or SKUs at the row level. The first thing we'll look at is discounting analysis. And I believe that this dashboard helps us bring visibility to discounting across deals, relieving that predicament I mentioned about sales reps selling to similar customers across geographies. But it'll also help your management team understand the give-get equation of your pricing policies. What do I mean by that? One best practice in pricing is that if you're going to give away a discount or adjust your pricing downwards, you ought to be doing that and structuring your agreements so that you're getting something in return from your customers. And think about the things that you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get longer-term commitments, higher sales volumes, better payment terms? That's what you want to be making sure that you're not just giving away value without getting something in return. All right, let's dive into this dashboard. So here's our first dashboard, the discounting policy analysis scatter plot. And I'll walk you through this pane by pane. In the top section, we have a scatter plot of individual sales transactions. Again, the row level is the products themselves, but we've got this aggregated to a deal. On the y-axis, we have a percentage discount from list price. And on the x-axis, we have sales volume. So imagine this company that's using this dashboard has a volume-based discounting strategy. They want to offer more discounting, they give more discounting as they get a higher sales commitment, more users per customer. So as you look from left to right on there, you see how sales transactions increase in seat size and the discounting increases. Just below that scatter plot, we have an average discount, sort of a KPI, if you will, an aggregate metric that's unique to each of those panes. So we have that broken up into different tiers of seats. And down below, there's another table that shows which transactions of those categories were within their pricing policy and outside of their pricing policy. You might be surprised to see you see a lot of lovely visuals and a lot of dashboards, but there's tables here, right? And I think maybe some finance people also got excited to see some tables. I know that can be one inhibitor for people analyzing their data is how do I get my finance team comfortable with data analysis? I actually really like to have a visual and a table. A table kind of grounds you, right, in understanding for people getting acclimated to visualizations, that all the data's there. You can see there's a total of 21,000 transactions, that you can really understand. If somebody's familiar with reading this information in a table already, you can put that same table right there in Tableau. And you can accompany it with a more powerful visual to help go further. And it's not just a static set of tables and KPIs, though. We can interact with that, right? So if I select one of the rows, like I really care more about what's the average discount of a sale that's outside of my policies. I like the average in general looks healthy, but I really want to know what are those outliers doing. So when I select the group that's out of policy down in the crosstab below, my discounts, my average discount automatically updates. We really get a much better feel for how much value might we be giving away in some of these outliers. You see how that also highlights the scatter plot of transactions above. And you can even drill further, of course, select a specific cell, and start to really get down into, oh, look, in this tier where we're giving normally a 15% discount for most customers, there's certain customers that we're actually giving a 47% discount. That's a significant difference. Now, I'm showing it a worldwide in this example, but in your organization, you want to make things more actionable and specific to different people. Right? So in a dashboard like this, you can filter it down to a specific region as opposed to just worldwide. So here I filter it down to a Europe, Middle East, Africa example, and you can see how you could take a dashboard like this and make it more applicable to specific sales regions, sales teams, even industries. Stepping back to the consolidated level, usually when I present something to management, there's this interest in outliers. We're like, well, tell me a little bit, let's go figure out these outliers. So one thing I do is I embed a lot of information in tooltips. I like to start by having a lot of aggregate information kind of cleanly displayed, but then give myself paths in Tableau to go further if I need to. So what we have here on the screen is just hovering over one of the scatterplot marks. I have a lot of information about the transaction, but I also want to highlight is at the very bottom of the tooltip, I have a Vision tooltip. Now, this is a feature that came out in early 2018, so it's been around for a little while. But if you haven't used it before or seen it, let me just walk you through quickly how to add a Vision tooltip into a view. So if we jump into this sheet that we have here, if you're familiar with the marks card, you'll select the tooltip mark there, just like you would editing any other tooltip. And what you'll see is you'll be inserting a sheet just like you would with any other dimension in a view. So you see now there's a Sheets button right at the top of that dropdown. And when you go into that, you'll find that I have all of the other sheets in my workbook that I can select from. So I'm going to select this account profile sheet. And you see down below, there's this large syntax I've just brought in. Let me kind of give you the plain English on what this syntax is saying. It's saying here, like, here's the sheet that I'm going to be pulling into the tooltip, and then this max width and height, those are the number of pixels that are going to, like, the maximum size of this Vision tooltip. And I worked in photography in high school, so I'm a little familiar with pixels, but we can iterate on that and preview it in here to get a better sense if you're not familiar yourself. And the last piece here is filtering, right? What is this going to filter on? How do I get context when I hover over each mark? Because it's different for each transaction. Well, by default, Tableau will just say it's going to filter on all fields. What that means is it's going to filter this second visualization the same way it's filtering the scatter plot. But I don't want that, right? I just want to have it show me sales for just that account, that sales customer. So I can go in and just like, again, adding anything else to a tooltip, I can adjust that default all fields. I can pull in the customer's account. So now when I hover over each of those transactions, it's going to be a specific view just for that customer relationship. And again, going back to that pixel conversation, I can click on this preview button before I go back to anywhere and just understand what is this going to look like in my dashboard. And so you can see what I'm showing here now is more context. Beyond that individual transaction, I'm actually showing sales over time with this customer. So I can better answer, like maybe we're discounting more because this is a bigger customer that we've had a long relationship with. There's some different attribute than what my main dashboard was showing. This looks a little big and clunky to me. I don't really want it at that 300 by 300. So again, like I said, you can just iterate on the pixel counts and hit preview again and get to where you'd rather have it. And this kind of looks a little bit better to me, a smaller size like this. So I'll stick with 200 by 200. And then I add a little title over it so that I can have that as well. And there's the exact same view we looked at together in the finished dashboard. Stepping back to the dashboard itself, Vision Tooltips, again, came out in early 2018, so it's been a little while. But I also made this dashboard, and we constantly have new releases, so there's releases that come out after I make things, and I'm a business user like yourself. I kind of just want to try out new features myself. So when Explain Data came out, have anyone of you seen an Explain Data demo this week? Awesome. So Explain Data is far more complicated than I can comprehend, but it does a lot of AI analysis to help you derive some insights into your data. And I was actually really interested in just throwing that into this dashboard, because you don't have to change anything to access Explain Data. It came out in September in 2019.3. You don't have to do anything, it's just there. But I was also curious because this is dummy data, and I thought, well, what is it going to tell me about all this? I spent randomizing this data, right? How is it going to say anything? So to access explain data, you can just hover over or right-click a specific scatterplot transaction, and one route is to right-click it, and you'll see that now as a drop-down option. Another option is just to hover over scatterplot mark, and don't right-click, but just if you hover long enough, you'll see that little line of options, and there's a light bulb there as well. Those are two paths to get to it. Again, I didn't have to do anything, it just is in the product. So when I click on explain data, it starts rendering and trying to analyze of the 21,000 transactions I'm explaining, having in this view, what's some insight about them. And you have to pick a measure, like what do you want to understand? And I used to be an auditor before Tableau, and I love to break things. So I was like, how do I really trick this thing and make some nonsense out of it? So I asked it to analyze the sum of item amount unit. You wouldn't really sum unit prices. That doesn't make any sense. You would average them, right? Well, it came back with this result, and this is kind of its results pane. Excuse me. If you see here, though, if you want to see more and get this into a view, there's actually a button right here that you can click that will turn this insight into its own sheet automatically. So when I clicked on this, it's a little bit easier to see this one insight right here. What it identified is it said, hey, did you know that there are single-year deals and long-term multi-year deals in this data set, and that the average unit price is actually different by about 7% between the two. And what I thought was interesting is, again, this was dummy data, so I didn't know what it was going to tell me. But when we walked through the dashboard together, there was nowhere in my dashboard that I was actually using this field, right? I didn't have that as part of my view. I wasn't using that to tell any of the story. But yet, explain data found something with this dimension that was available in my data set. It's actually giving me an insight that now I realize maybe I want to pull an attribute like this into my analysis. So I just thought this was a kind of cool example where I knew little about explain data myself, played with it with even dummy data, and it told me something interesting. So I think it's cool to check out if you have dashboards. I encourage just exploring with it. You might learn something new about data you already know, or if you're not familiar with data that you get access to from someone else, you can use it to help you further understand it. So that's a little bit about this dashboard, right? Who could use this dashboard, or how do we use this internally at Tableau? Well, it does help with that sales scenario I talked about. Help sales team members understand when they're sitting there preparing a pricing proposal or quote, they can understand more on a relative basis what does a similarly sized deal with a similar customer look like. When you're in a management chain, though, and you're not in sales and you're approving pricing exceptions, you can really understand when someone says, I need that one-time pricing exception, we really have to do it. You can understand the value that's being given up, or how infrequently, or unfortunately how frequently, that one-time exception might happen. So again, here we talked a little bit about transparency across deals and your policy effectiveness. You spend all this time setting these list prices and your discounting strategies, but do you take the time to reflect upon and analyze how you're actually doing this in practice? And we showed off just two features, Viz and Tooltip and explain data along the way. With our next dashboard, we looked at a deal level, but let's get into actual product analysis. So I'm going to look at an average selling price analysis, where we'll analyze relative pricing across different product offerings, not at a deal level. So here's our second dashboard, and we'll walk this left to right. On the left-hand side, you see a bar chart. It has different product categories on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, it's over time. This bar chart is showing you an annualized average selling price by product offering. And again, this is for subscription, so that's why it's an annualized price. That's an aggregate metric. And on the right-hand side, you can actually see, again, a scatter plot. You can tell I'm a fan of scatter plots. You can see individual transactions at that product level. On the y-axis, we have the contract size, and on the x-axis, we have the number of seats. If I select one of the bar charts and I want to drill into just that period and that product, you'll see how I can filter the scatter plot and just get down to those transactions. What also came up down below is another view, this clustering analysis. You can see I've added trend lines here as well, and so you can see how it's giving you some information that there's trends going on beneath just this one product category. If you're really into statistics and want to look more into that, you can obviously describe the trend model and look at some of the statistical data and pull this out of Tableau for further analysis. Or if you just really want to get a sense of looking at the data itself, You can view the data right there, and what's kind of cool is it's segmented the product sales into 2 different groups, these clusters. And you can see there's a column here in this data that's already added cluster to the data, so you can kind of further analyze that data by those clusters. And what is this clustering analysis, though? It's an algorithm that Tableau uses, and this is not a super new feature, but it's kind of cool. It helps analyze if there's commonalities between records in your data. So how would we actually go into doing that clustering analysis? Well, if I jump into that clustering sheet, kind of removing all of the clustering stuff, we just see, again, just those transactions for that premium product category. And over in the analytics pane, you can see down in the modeling section below forecast, there's this clustering view that you can pull in, just drag and drop that into the view. And you can specify how you want to cluster things. So I want to group my sales by average selling price. And you can tell it how many groups you want, or you can have it kind of automatically analyze the appropriate number of groups. And there you have, once I've pulled that in, the same clusters that we saw before. And you can pull a lot of detailed data about those clusters, too, if you want to go further with understanding what's going on with them. From pricing, though, why would you care about this? What is this clustering analysis doing for us? Well, suppose that this company doesn't have any different price books or customer segments. It's just kind of got a generic price for a product. This is actually helping surface that even though you might set list prices at one level, in practice, your sales team or your customer behavior is resulting in different customer segments that you aren't capturing. So it's kind of a useful tool if you're kind of beginning with your sales analysis to understand if there might potentially be trends beneath the surface in your sales data. Let's go back to the dashboard itself. And one thing you'll notice is that when I unselected that bar chart, that clustering analysis is gone, right? It's not taking up any real estate in the view. So one really old trick that's been in the Tableau, in Tableau for a long time is this ability to sort of collapse a view in your dashboard when it's not being used. And if you haven't used that, I'll show you quickly how to do this. So I'll just go to a blank dashboard. And if you're like me when I first started, we were all beginners, you just kind of want to drag sheets into the dashboard. That's like, oh, I'm going to build my dashboard, right? So I'll pull that scatter plot in, and then I'll pull in that clustering analysis sheet as well. But what happened, right? It's giving that blank clustering sheet half the real estate, which is terrible when you don't need it. How do I solve that? In the bottom left here, there's things called layout containers, rather. So there's a horizontal and vertical layout. If I drag those into the view before putting a sheet, it can help balance the sheets within the dashboard. So I pulled that in first, then I pull in my scatter plot just like we saw. But now when I pull in the clustering, the layout container knows that the clustering analysis is not needed in the view, and it's just going to collapse that when there's no information to show. I think of layout containers. I worked for my high school newspaper, and so I love that layout design. So you kind of go through your pricing analysis, but you want to make something impactful and usable for people. Often I hear you might have information overload when you throw a lot of information into a dashboard. So having kind of collapsible views in a layout container is one way to add more information and call upon it when you need it, but hide it when you don't need it. Speaking of hiding things, we also had earlier this year a ShowHide button in our May 2019 release. If I click this button up here, I can hide the legends or the filters rather on the right-hand side. And I pulled the legends. You might be wondering why they're all on the right-hand side. I pulled them out just to make that more obvious for you. How do I put that ShowHide button into a view, though? So if I just take that layout container, you can tell I'm using layout containers a lot in this dashboard. And I go down, and this drop-down at the top of this, there's this Add ShowHide button. I just click that. It's going to bring a button into the view. And there's a lot of things you can customize with this button, right? So you can set what do you want it to look like, what do you want it to look like when it's clicked or not clicked, what do you want it to do when you click it. I've just set it up to look visible right here and to show and hide those filters when I don't need them. But you can make the button hidden itself. Why would you do this, right? Again, I kind of like having dashboards where I can interact with them and set things up and do an analysis. But you often, for your senior leadership team, want to have a really crisp and clean report to share with them. I like the ShowHide button because you can hide the button, make that non-visible, but you know where to click it as an analyst. And you can kind of configure your dashboard, find some insight, then hide everything that's unnecessary for somebody to view. Just hide that out of the view, give them what they need to see, and send them that. And there's a little bit about that ShowHide button. What do we use this for at Tableau, and who would use this? Well, as you know, I talked about how we shifted from just subscription pricing to role-based offerings. And our role-based offerings are structured so that they're relative to having power users, normal users, and introductory users at an organization. So their pricing is relative to one another because their value is relative to one another. So having our pricing by product category in the left-hand side kind of helps you see that relative relationship and how we're doing. So again, in this dashboard, just what we sampled on, you can analyze relative pricing trends across product categories. And if you don't have defined customer segments, or even if you think you have defined customer segments, clustering analysis can help you see if there's something else beneath your data set that you don't know about. So beyond clustering, we showed 2 other tricks with the layout containers and the ShowHide button to pull data in when you need it and hide it when you don't need it. The last view we're going to look through today is proposal analysis, comparing pricing proposals against recent wins and losses. Here's this last dashboard. Again, another scatter plot. This is at a transaction level. And on the y-axis, we have the annual price per user, or seat. And on the x-axis, we have the deal size. Now imagine this is for a company that's looking at its biggest transactions. Right? So we started with all discounting on all transactions, going at product level, and now we're actually just looking at the largest transactions. As many of you may know, you may structure sort of a run rate business policy around your pricing. But when you get into your biggest customers and your biggest transactions, all things are up for grabs when you're analyzing how to price. Just pulling in some of the other information, you can see I've got a different shape of the marks in the view. I have closed transactions that we won, deals that we lost, and deals that are in our pipeline. So I think it's important. I showed you analyzing deals that have closed, like analyzing historical sales data, but I think it's important too to analyze the deals you didn't win and the deals that are still in process. Also down below at the very bottom, I added in just some summary views for a price per user, a user count, and a total deal size when you select a given transaction. Because when you have a lot of transactions in the view, you can't load up the screen with too much information, and you want to be able to look at things relative to one another. So if I select a given transaction, like this Tom's Telecom, I can see the specific things, the pricing for that deal down below without having to have like a hover tooltip or a lot of labels for it. And I've added some reference lines. You know, my eyes are getting sore now that I have kids and getting older. So I like the reference lines that show just where you are relative to other transactions. Reminds me of like old grid lines when you used to have older graphs. One thing about this Tom's Telecom transaction that's bothering me, and again, I made dummy data, but when you look at and compare it, it's a pipeline, so it hasn't booked yet, or hasn't been lost. It's in our pipeline. It's sticking out relative to the trend of the rest of the deals, right? There's just no way a proposal that's at this price point for this user quantity is going to close. Something's got to be wrong with that data, right? And we talk a lot about filtering out outliers or hiding things you don't need in your analysis, but when you're doing your sales pipeline, you can't treat it like your social media feed. You can't hide the things you don't like. So often this, have you ever been thrown off by analysis where you start to visualize your data and you're like, something's wrong with this. I can't put this in front of my leadership team. This is either going to throw off a KPI or it's distracting, and I need to figure out what's going on. And that can take a lot of time, right, to start to resolve what's going on in your underlying data. Well, here's one neat trick. Again, a feature that's been around forever, but you can use it in a different way. You can see in the tooltip at the very bottom, I have a little link that says email sales rep. So I can just click a button and I can actually call my Outlook mail. I have pre-populated information about this transaction, so I can just quickly email the salesperson involved in the deal, and ask them like, hey, can you take a look at this transaction? Something's wrong with it in the system. Now this is powerful when you might be in finance and you don't actually have control to write or access make changes to your sales data directly in a source system. So I'm able to send that email and just stay all within Tableau. I don't have to research anything about how to pull all that into my email. It was just like 1, 2, 3, and I'm off back to my analysis. I don't know if you've ever seen this yourself, but I have seen salespeople put into a CRM proposals that they were like thinking of doing. Or this is a common problem too, where you create a transaction in a system and it defaults to list price, but it's clearly not going to sell at a list price at that deal size. I like being able to take that action and just immediately call for them to do something and then get back to my analysis. How did I do that? Again, I'll show you how to do this. You'll go to your dashboard actions. And you'll create, I see here I have this action that's a go to URL. But instead of actually going to a website, I'm telling Tableau to call my mail program. And this is just some simple syntax, but basically you just need to have mail to, you have a field for whatever the email address is. In your CRM, you might have your sales folks tag to the deal, and then you'll have their email there. You can call that in. And you can pre-populate whatever you want, the subject line. You can pull all that information into the body of the email that you want related to the transaction. And so, when you think of things like it says go to URL, you can use it to send emails quickly with the data. Moving on beyond just solving that Tom's Telecom transaction, you'll notice that if I actually click on different marks, as I said before, I can have automatically at the bottom, I can update the summary of the transaction. So I've selected this Steve streaming, and all the data down below changed. My reference lines moved as well. I can keep clicking around and updating all of that. What I can also do is I can actually look at a transaction now that I've done this. And you can see in my tooltip at the very bottom, I have a delta, like change in price per user, change in user count, change in deal size. And it's 0 because I'm just comparing a deal to itself. But I can now, after I've selected one transaction, look at another one. And when I hover over that other transaction, I can see relative differences in the pricing and the size of those deals. So here I can see I started by selecting Rob's Retailing on the right-hand side. I'm hovering over this FinTechnica deal. I can see that they were at the same price per user, but at a smaller user count. And I can actually understand the delta in the deal size just by the tooltip itself. So I can see that this deal, we probably discounted too heavily in, right? And we sold at 4,000 fewer users, and we're heavily lower on our contract value. Beyond just comparing those two, though, and selecting individual marks, I can select multiple marks at once, and I can take an average of them. So I could say, what if I wanted to put a deal that's somewhere in between the two of these? What would that get me? So here I selected, you can go back, Rob's Retailing and Bob's Home Supply, a deal that we lost. What would it have looked like if we had a transaction that was somewhere between the two? And this automatically doesn't just tell you somewhere between the two, it tells you the average of the two deals. So now I have a plotted point that's between the two, and I've updated those averages down below. How did I do all of that? Just by interacting with the dashboard. This is one of the newer features that came out this year called parameter actions. So we'll go back to those dashboard actions that we went to earlier for going to a website and doing the mail trick. Now you can see I have some other dashboard actions as well, but this is called a parameter action. Parameter action allows you, you heard about dynamic parameters this week, which is awesome, but parameter actions that came out allows you to actually update parameter values by interacting with a view. So here what I've done is, run this action on selecting one of the transactions, focusing on the price per user, and you can actually even choose what you want to do if you want to select multiple transactions. So that's how I selected, okay, if I select 2 deals, give me the average of the 2. There's other things you can choose from as you see in the drop-down. Show me larger of the 2, some other information, or if you don't want users to use this, just turn it off and set none. I think this is really helpful because when you talk about those largest transactions, you've ever had executives kind of want to reflect on, if we're coming up with a proposal, where does it fit in the landscape with similar customers? And again, you don't want to have these what-if deals in your CRM like that Tom's Telecom, because other people are using that data for analysis, and if you put dummy data in production, it's a nightmare. So you can do some of that what-if analysis right here in Tableau without having to write anything to your system. So now we're back away from, back to the dashboard after having done those parameter actions together. One other thing we can do, though, is not just select individual marks, but we can kind of use this as a basic calculator to enter in a deal on our own. So on the right-hand side, I have parameters where I can input a price per user and a user count myself. Now I can move the reference line if I update the price per user away from Rob's retailing into something else. Like what if I wanted to hire a similar deal at same user count but at a higher price? Again, you could see how you could avoid having to push this through a CRM to analyze. Just do it right in Tableau and do a little calculator like this. It's nice because you're doing this, and maybe you've built a calculator before in Excel or some other tool that's basic, but you have visualized right with you all of those other deals as you're doing it. And it's nice to be able to put in a price per user and a user count. But we all know that ultimately you have budget constraints with your customers. So it's not just putting in a price and a size. Often your customers might know how much quantity they want, but they have a budget constraint. So I can just adjust this parameter here. And instead of inputting price and user count, I can adjust it to just putting in a user count and a budget. And so now I've actually capped the calculation. So if I say, well, the customer only has 550 grand to spend, we can back into what price point would we have to charge at this user count. And I can start clicking on things too and starting to look at similar different deal sizes of seats, but being constrained by that budget. So I can lower that budget down to 500,000. You can see how that continues to change. Again, I find this really helpful. It's just a simple way to give some information about those biggest deals, understanding how we can think about relative pricing between them, and do sort of simple what-if proposals without having to go through like bottlenecking yourself in an actual quoting tool or process, without having to approve things, right? Because there's so much iterations that you might go through when you're thinking about big deal proposals. So with the business value that we have here, we identified that pipeline anomaly, that deal that was stuck at list price in the system that clearly wasn't right. We looked at relative deals and compared to one another, and we kind of just did some ad hoc, what if we price something this way, what does that look like? And I showed you one newer feature, parameter actions, that came out earlier this year, and an oldie but a goodie of using URL actions to email customers, or sales reps. So we covered a lot today in just a short amount of time. Just to recap, we looked at 3 different dashboards, right? We looked at that discounting policy analysis. We looked at the relative pricing of different product categories. And we just looked at that what-if proposal analysis, comparing potential deals to your wins and your losses. And we covered 7 different things you can do in Tableau, some of which are brand new features that came out this year. Others are kind of oldies but goodies. If you're excited about this kind of stuff and want to go further, there's so much we could have covered that we couldn't reach in 1 hour today. There's finance analytics solutions on our website. And if you're not familiar with Tableau Public, our community, our finance team, again, the business users inside Tableau, we have an account called Tableau for Finance. The link's right here. On Tableau Public, we're taking dashboards like the ones I showed you, putting dummy data on them, making them available to you. So it's kind of like that wine tasting. If you liked what you saw, you could take a bottle home and go try it yourself further. So I encourage you to go on there, follow that site. There's so many other use cases even beyond pricing, and we keep adding things. So those dashboards that you saw today, the first 2 are already available on that site right now. And just some final closing thoughts. Whether you're selling squeezable sour cream, a streaming service, or software subscriptions like Tableau, pricing is all about the value you create, and you want to capture that value from your customers. Think about designing your pricing dashboards in a way that give aggregate KPIs and information to your management team, but are also really actionable for people that have to make pricing decisions in the field. I hope today that you enjoyed this and you can think about how you can apply this to your business. Thank you very much. I'm James. Here's my contact info. Thank you.